Fiona Patten, the fabulous Fiona Patten. Say no more. Sex Party Victoria, Member of Parliament, doing her party proud. Made some really important interventions in Victoria. And right next to me, Gabe Buckley, who is the president of the Liberal Democrats Party. They have a senator whose name I can never pronounce.
Lionhelm.
Thank you for saying that, Dave.
David Lionhelm.
David, I remember. Lionhelmer. And Gabe is the president of the Liberal Democrats, also hoping, no doubt, to have David return to the Senate in the upcoming election. So, enough from me. I'm going to ask each of the people up here to speak for 2 minutes. We have to be out of here by 7, unfortunately. There's more fun to be had afterwards, so we've got to be reasonably concise. So we'll ask people to speak for 2 minutes. Then we'll invite questions from the audience. I'm going to try to shut up a fair bit. Questions from the audience, and we'll get 2 or 3 people to answer each question. We won't give everyone a go on each question, but we'll try to spread it around a little bit, okay? This hall is a lovely place. I say that often when I come here. I come here a bit. It's a lovely place, great hall, great atmosphere, but you can't be heard if you don't have a microphone. Simple as. So if you want to ask a question, please do, but put your hand up. We have a roving mic. If you want to make a comment, say something that you want anyone else to hear, you've got to use the mic, okay? So we've got a roving mic. If you want to ask a question, make a comment, stick your hand up, and we'll get the microphone to you. But first of all, might as well just do it in order, because that's as much planning as I put into this. Andrew Kavasilas, first cab off the rank, will address us on the question. Particularly, we've asked the panellists to talk about not why they should change the law, let's assume a fair bit of common ground on that, but how to actually go about it.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for being here. The hemp party we're talking about here is a federal hemp party. We've been registered for quite a while. We do get a fair few votes, about 1% or a bit more. I suppose what we've noticed over decades now, the way to change the law on cannabis is very, very difficult. We're in the same boat as most every other country in the world. We absolutely understand that no government in the world has willingly introduced a medical cannabis regime at a federal level or at a state level. And we understand, as has been described in various parliamentary inquiries about medical cannabis and other cannabis uses, there is international roadblocks. And until a government, and especially here in Australia, at a federal level addresses those international roadblocks that are holding back, for instance, medical cannabis research and scientific use, we're really going nowhere. I think about a year and a half ago, we kind of did come up with the, as a single issue party, if we were to have one member up, the best we could really do is to call for a parliamentary inquiry at a federal level, looking at those international obstacles and the roadblocks and what Australia really needs to do to get medical cannabis, for instance, up and going, let alone recreational social use. So, you know, as a federal party, we understand that's where it is. There's no state governments will ever be able to change the laws or bring in medical cannabis. It really has to be at a federal level. And when we have a look at the international context, there's no federal government in the world that has willingly introduced medical cannabis. And so with that kind of understanding, we know the only progress really that can happen is through, you know, perhaps some kind of parliamentary inquiry, but definitely what we'd be striving to do is really address and get a better understanding of those roadblocks that are holding everyone back. That's where we reckon it really is, and the more people who understand the issue and understand the way that we do will therefore understand that, yeah, that is the only way to do it.
Thank you, Andrew. Speaking forcefully on behalf of the Hemp Party, Glenn Druery.
G'day, I'm Glenn Druery. I'm a political strategist, and I've been working with minor parties and independents for the past 20 years. I just want to disagree with something you said, Andrew. Yeah. Laws can be changed, but they're changed by people like these two people here. Victorian Parliament, New South Wales Parliament, both are in a balance of power situation depending on the numbers, depending on the day and how things work. And that's how you get things done, in my view. You get yourself elected, you be part of a balance of power team, and you change the laws.
Now what I'm saying is no government has done it. No state government, definitely.
No, but it is possible.
It's a federal issue.
My partner is from Colorado, so I was in Colorado the day that the laws changed there and spent a bit of time in various places talking to local politicians. So it's doable. It's absolutely doable.
We just need to clarify, in all those states in the US, they were citizens-initiated referendums and all those state governments fought no campaigns.
Yeah, but the bottom line is they now have legalisation. I come from things, a very different standpoint than what you might hear from some of the panellists tonight. I've been involved in helping minor parties and independents get elected. Many of the crossbenchers that you see around the place, I've worked with. I've been working with HEMP on and off for how many years? A long time. HEMP came very, very close to winning a Senate seat in Queensland and WA. But in politics, there are no prizes for second place, but they were very, very close to winning. Recently, we've had some Senate voting reforms and perhaps you could make a comment on this in a minute, David. Some type of deal was done between the Greens and the Liberal Party to effectively wipe out political parties like HEMP and the Sex Party at a federal level. Because of these rules and these law changes, it will now be in the future very, very difficult for minor parties and independents to be elected at a federal level, at the Senate at least. Existing parties like the Greens, Xenophon, should be okay into the short to intermediate future, but minor parties coming from nothing, it's almost over at a federal level. Having said that, New South Wales, I'm going to suggest to you here publicly that you guys register in New South Wales, and you too, Fiona and Gabe, Liberal Democrats, Sex Party and HEMP at New South Wales. That is doable, absolutely doable. We saw at the last state election, the Animal Justice Party was elected on a very small primary vote of just 1.86%, I believe, and they are now sitting with David in the New South Wales Parliament.
Thanks for putting it on the panel. I think it's great. I'll deal with Senate voting reforms in a sec. As a Greens MP, I actually don't think parliaments go out of their way to change things, and Andrew kind of pointed that out. What we saw in the US wasn't a bunch of parliamentarians, some minor cross parties or whatever, coming together and creating a revolution in a parliament. It's just not the way it works. Parliaments are inherently conservative creatures. That's why Glenn gets people like the Shooters MPs and the Christian Democrats elected to the New South Wales Parliament. Inherently, we've both Shooters then. Inherently conservative. And you have to force change on parliaments. They don't just do it because they wake up one day and realise, you know what, we've been acting like a goose for the last 100 years on cannabis, we really should sort it out and legalise cannabis. You have to force them to do it. And I don't think the world's best parliamentary inquiry is going to change the laws on cannabis. That being said, I commend what Fiona's doing in Victoria. It's part of a suite of things you do. But if we're going to change the laws on cannabis, and let's be clear about it, as a Greens MP, New South Wales Greens MP, our policy is legalise cannabis, regulate cannabis and tax cannabis. That's what we want to do with cannabis. And we're going to do that not because Mike Baird wakes up with an epiphany one day. We're going to do it because we force them to do it. Because we make it so bloody uncomfortable for them not to do it, because they work out that a great majority of Australians think it's time we got over it on cannabis and we legalised it and we had our police doing something better than putting these roadblocks all around communities and fighting our communities. That's how we're going to do it.
Thanks, David, and thank you all for coming along to this. I hope it is interesting. So, how to change the law in 2 minutes. I agree somewhat with everyone here. I believe, look, I'm not here to change the curtains in the lodge. The Sex Party has no desire necessarily to do that, but we want to be there to nudge the major parties. And as a small party, that's what we can do. So in the 18 months that I've been in Parliament in Victoria, I've managed to get a private member's bill up on safe access zones around abortion. Now, everyone agreed with that. The whole community agreed with that, but the politicians didn't want to upset the Christian right. After that, I was able to get an end-of-life choices inquiry up. Now, again, everyone knows we have to have a conversation about dying with dignity and end of life. Again, the major parties do not want to spearhead that. So it takes small parties like the Greens, like myself, like the Hemp Party, the LDP, to nudge those major dinosaurs along. And most recently, I got a very broad joint house drug inquiry that's looking at testing. How effective is it? What treatments are actually working for people who are harmed by drugs? What laws are working? Or, more importantly, how are they not working? What are other countries doing? And over MardiGrass, I've been feeling, I get really optimistic and think, yes, we can do it, and seeing the energy around the room and the optimism and the people who are doing stuff on medicinal cannabis, regardless of what politicians are doing about changing the laws. It's fantastic. And then I fall into a slump when I hear, that's right. But then I look at Canada, I look at California. We are seeing a tipping point around the world, regardless of the treaties. Canada at UN said, fuck you. We're going to do it anyway. And I think that's, I hope that that we can nudge and push those politicians to be brave enough to say fuck you as well, and listen to the general population and listen to all of us about the law reforms and the drug laws that we want to see. And I think the more small parties involved, the more likely we will to be affecting change.
Thank you. And Gabe.
Thank you. Well, the way I see it is that cannabis is just an issue of freedom. We should be free to grow a couple of plants in our backyards. We should be free to go and, if we live in an apartment, we can't grow our own. We should be free to go and buy some off somebody who can. We should be free to walk around the streets with it in our back pockets. We should be free to smoke it. What is a government? It's a device that limits people's freedoms. Less government, more freedom. So, in addition to voting for parties that have pro-legalisation stances, like the Hemp Party, like the Sex Party, like the LDP, not like the Greens. If you have a look on the Australian Greens website, it says the Australian Greens do not support the legalisation of any currently illegal drugs. That's verbatim off the Greens website. So we can leave them out of this. The way to do it is just to stop voting for the major parties, and I include the Greens in that. Just vote for a Hemp, for a Sex, for an LDP. The more individual and granular you get your representation, the more chance you've got of them listening to you when you pick up the phone and calling them. I know that David Leyonhjelm's office gets tons of calls, and he personally responds to a number of them because he doesn't have the massive staff budgets, the massive PR budgets. You could try and talk to a major party politician, you have to go through 7 different gatekeepers to get at them. So yeah, if you want to change the law, stop voting for people that are going to be resistant to the change, and start voting for people that are going to progress it for you, because we are out there, and it just takes a bit of research to work out who, and with the new changes, you can number a number of different boxes across the line, so it actually opens up your choices a fair way. It's just we've got to get that information out there. It's no longer just one above the line. That's what the major parties wanted, because everybody has been doing that for 30 years, and they're just going to walk in there, and 90% of the population is just going to keep going one above the line. So it's important to spread that word too, that you actually need to number at least 6 above the line this time around.
Thank you, Gabe. Well, thank you, everybody, in fact. A little bit of niggle. Politics is like that. A little bit of niggle. Your turn. There must be a question or 5 or 10 in the audience. Please indicate. People at the front are very quick. Kathleen is not here. Stu, round the front, please.
I'm not going to be able to.
Please give the microphone to this person. Thank you.
So, to the Liberal Democrat
Just be closer.
guy, everything goes. Like, you can...
Just be closer, otherwise. Microphone a bit closer to your mouth is what you need.
Okay. So, I could light a cigarette and smoke in your face. I could get a gun out because I'm allowed to have a gun and cigarettes, and so anything goes. That seems to be the shooters and the Liberal Democrats and the... without any government restriction, what kind of society will we have? You're on this bandwagon because anything goes. I can't...
I'm on
Where
this
does it
bandwagon
stop?
because I've been a cannabis user for the last 25 years.
So what are you in that party for? Why aren't you in that party?
Because I also believe in a lot of other freedoms.
Like what? I mean, what else do you believe in?
Well, I believe that people should not be unfairly controlled by the government. I think if you're not hurting somebody else, then the government really has no business going in and telling you to stop what you're doing.
So you can have guns in your house and you believe in that?
Yeah, sure. It's
Well-
your house. You know, why do I care what you do in your house?
Well, I do. You know,
Yeah,
look
well,
at, look
if
at
you don't want to do it in your house,
Port
don't do it.
Arthur and I mean, and there's more guns in society.
We
at the moment.
already have
I would
laws
not
against
vote,
killing
I would
people.
not vote for I'd rather the government protect
That's all right.
me
There's
against
some
guns.
excellent choices here you can vote for.
Exactly. I just think that what you're on about, your party is, it's not a good thing.
Would anyone else on the panel like to respond? David?
Go for it, David.
Well, look, we're here to talk about cannabis law reform, and I think I'm glad the Liberal Democrats support cannabis law reform. I think it's good, and Fiona, and I think Glenn does, although I'm pretty sure he does, and Andrew does, and I've got to say I'm a Greens New South Wales MP, and our policy platform, and remember the Crimes Act and the Drug Misuse and Trafficking Act are all state laws, and our unambiguous platform as a Greens New South Wales MP, everybody you vote for as a Greens MP, to be a Greens MP in New South Wales, signs onto the platform of legalising cannabis. Okay, let's be clear about it. We all believe in legalising cannabis, everyone you vote for in New South Wales. Federally, at a federal level, the Australian Greens policy is about decriminalising, not legalising. But of course, this is all going to happen in New South Wales, and everyone you vote for as a Greens rep in New South Wales absolutely commits to legalising, regulating and taxing cannabis, absolutely. And so why do we have division amongst ourselves, which we agree? I find it really kind of annoying. And I think what that does do is it stops the building of a movement. And this idea that we're going to win the argument on cannabis by a clever politician making some clever argument and causing division, or even, having this moment where they suddenly persuade everybody, that is nonsense. I'm in the Greens because I believe in an activist party that doesn't just get up in Parliament and says something, and I do that. We do that in New South Wales, we do that federally, we get up in Parliament and say things. But you join what you do in Parliament. You work as an MP, you work yourself ragged as an MP in Parliament by building connections with the community and building a movement in a community, and you bounce back and forth. And I don't believe some specious, clever, pathetic argument between MPs or between politicians is the way we're going to change this. It's building a combined collective movement to change the laws.
Thank you, David. First at the front.
I just want to say that most contentious law reform requires a joint approach. It requires precisely, and this will too, to get to effect really good law reform. This is. Gabe's right, this is actually a moral issue and it is an issue of freedom, but it's a civil libertarian issue, and it is an issue that we don't want to see harm, but we do. It will take a joint approach. Again, as I say that, and I love saying that now. And I hope that we can put up a bill that is supported by multiple parties, and that will, quite possibly happen at state levels before it happens at federal.
Thank you.
Okay.
Question at the front.
Yeah. I've forgotten your name, sorry.
Gabe.
Dave. Why on earth would any party who wants to be taken seriously use the word liberal? It is on the nose with most voters. So people see liberal whatever and they think of John Howard, Tony Abbott or whatever, and you certainly could not deliver a message that was believable using that brand.
Well, we're taking the brand back. That's us. We've got videos out that say, we're the real liberals, and we have a tradition of classical liberalism that dates back to the Scottish Enlightenment. And just because Robert Menzies decided to misuse the term 60-odd years ago doesn't mean we can't use it. And if you're picking political parties on names, it's a bit like picking Melbourne Cup horses on the colours of the jockeys. Neither do I, but I'm just drawing the analogy for people.
David wants a second go. I was going to ask Glenn as well. He might have a comment about dealing with people with liberal in their names of the party.
Well, we saw one of the principal reasons was to create absolute confusion in the voter. Liberal Democrat confused 9% of people in New South Wales. Maybe that was Glenn's advice. I don't know.
Well, no, you didn't. You may think that, but I would never agree. Look, certainly there was a degree of confusion, but there's no doubt that the Liberal Democrats are classical Liberals. The Liberal Party that we have in Parliament, in federally, and they're not Liberals, they're Conservatives. Yes, reactionary Conservatives. So I'm not sure there's anything wrong with the word liberal. That true liberalism isn't such a bad thing in a moderate form. Certainly some of their policies aren't too bad. But I'd just like to make a comment on what I've seen in Colorado. My partner is American, she's a school teacher, and she teaches in a low socioeconomic area where traditionally the schools haven't been given much money. And the Americans have an interesting way of funding schools. It's done at a local level, and you can vote at council elections as to how much tax you're going to put into schools. And Colorado is an interesting place. There are little areas of liberalism, but the rest of it's very, very conservative, and she's teaching in one of these areas where there's not much money for education. Since the liberalisation, I'll keep using that word, of cannabis laws, a tremendous amount of funding has gone into schools. So what she's seen, what I've seen, and I spend a lot of months of the year in Colorado, real things on the ground, apart from all of the other social reasons why I think it's good to liberalise drug laws, they've got smart boards in their classroom, they've got special ed teachers, they've had their air conditioning fixed up, so when it's minus 20 in winter, the kids aren't freezing to death. And I don't think these are the things that people generally think about and some of what's happened in places like Colorado. So while I do support some of the aspects that the Liberal Democrats talk about in terms of drug liberalisation and so on, I wouldn't support a free-for-all in that it's not taxed or not controlled in some way. And I use the Colorado example, and it's not perfect by any means, but it's not too bad.
Thank you. Put on the...
Hi there. I have a question for Greens MP David Shoebridge. You were talking about we have to regulate, legalise, regulate and tax. So when you say regulate, are you talking about a licensing system? And then what type of people are going to be able to access these licenses? Is it going to be like small entrepreneurs like me, average people that learn how to do these things and want to be able to set up businesses and pay their share of tax? Or is it going to be big multinationals like Philip Morris and British American Tobacco who actually don't even pay their tax? And I want to dig into you about your failure to crack down on the tax avoidance that companies like Wilson Security through the Panama Papers, and that was a big Greens mishap. But yeah, so on your idea of regulate and tax, what is the tax system you're proposing?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, first of all, the Greens fundamentally believe that you should be able to grow your own supply of cannabis without government regulation.
Okay.
So absolutely.
Nice.
And then we should be having a regulatory system which discourages it being taken over by multinationals and large corporations and actually encourages startups and communities basically growing their own supply. That's how we see a regulation system. And when it comes to tax, I'm sorry, tax and death, and they're all inevitabilities. And Colorado's shown a really good way that you can actually talk about cannabis law reform, talk about taxing the sales, and you have a sales tax, maybe a GST plus a little bit, I don't know, on cannabis, and you actually hypothecate, you direct that funding to something that you know is unambiguously good. So people actually tie cannabis law reform with building new school halls, putting smart boards in their schools' classrooms. So we think a smart regulatory environment would be that, a package of grow your own, a regulatory environment which encourages community-based cooperative models for growing cannabis and discourages corporatisation of the market, and where we get some tax out of the system that we can direct to something that's unambiguously good, so as the rest of society can celebrate cannabis law reform.
Thank you. And
Thank you,
Andrew,
David.
what does the...
Could I just quickly add
please.
to that? I mean, the Australian Sex Party has for many years had a very similar policy, and I've been looking around, looking at the Colorado model, looking at the Oregon model, looking at what Canada is starting to propose, looking at what the Netherlands has been doing for a number of years, and now also looking at what California is proposing. And the initiative there is very interesting. It is very community, is localised where the tax is going back. So it's actually going back to local communities. They're highlighting areas that will go back. And they're structuring the tax system accordingly, as well as allowing homegrown, which of course the Sex Party fully supports as well. I spoke to the police about this last year. In Victoria, out of Melbourne, there's 1,000 hothouses. And so they turn over about 100,000 a year, each hothouse. So we're talking, what's 1,000 times 100,000? Is that $1 billion? It's a gazillion. You know? Yeah, so if we could get 15% off that, but if we could get tax off that, if we could start taxing that, and I think even the police, they're saying this system is not working for us, and we need to look at a new system. And I think something that takes on regulation and ensures that it's kept transparent and that tax is paid, and as David says, goes to the right places.
And Andrew, what does the Hemp Party think about regulation and taxation and stuff like that?
Well, regulation, I suppose, we come back to supply. Of course, it should be regulated. We look at a lot of the examples you imagine would have happened when under alcohol prohibition in the US. So, look, most people just want to buy a bit of alcohol. There's no restrictions on you brewing your own beer or brewing your own alcohol, but 99% of people prefer to go and buy alcohol from a liquor outlet, you know, at probably 3 or 4 or 10 times more than what they could make it at home, if they could make it at all. I think cannabis, around the supply of cannabis, you're looking about, especially when we talk about governments, it's a 2-week discussion on how you would frame the supply around cannabis. Sure, you know, medical cannabis, let people grow at home. Well, you explain to that old person when they get home invaded, or when you don't have that avenue for them to go to most people who would, say for medical cannabis especially, most people who would find benefit from its use have never used cannabis. By and large, have never used cannabis, they've never been stoned, they've never smoked cannabis, and as a therapeutic agent, they should never really need to do any of those things, whether we call it pharmaceuticalised or whatever. But I think when we're talking about in a situation like this and somebody's asking about home grow, this is like, you know, somebody at a public forum when they were talking about ending alcohol prohibition, you know, this small minority of people, and I'm included, who want to grow their own. We are a small minority. Most people who would find benefit have never used cannabis. They don't have access to it. Australia smokes about a tonne of cannabis a day. We have $5 billion turnover in cannabis, recreational cannabis. I think a lot of that is, I mean, just the networks involved in trying to organise all that, let alone trying to organise clean, green cannabis for medical purposes. And I think it's very important to note, I hope people have caught up with Abe Acton and listened to his talks. He's a licensed grower over in Colorado there. And most of his talks, although he talks about the positive social outcomes, the positive unintended consequences of you know, states like Colorado whose governments were forced to introduce a medical cannabis regime and recreational. You know, again, it's like Fiona was saying, when we're talking about what's happened in Colorado, it was not a bunch of politicians trying to work out what should be done. It was a bunch of politicians, a government that had to react to the order of the people. They wanted a referendum. So, but when briefly, you know, if we don't look at these things properly, especially around regulation and taxation, around cannabis for medical purposes, and even recreational, we'll fall into the situation that's happening over in Colorado and a lot of other states where it's just big business. There is no testing of cannabis. There is no quality control. All these businesses, dispensaries, whatever, they can't bank their money. You've got, he was talking, quoting something like $100 million a year already floating around the black market where, people are buying regulated cannabis, but it's being taxed. But the people who are making the money can't bank it. There's no clinical trials of medical cannabis coming out of all these states in the US. They don't have access. It's illegal federally. They don't have access to licensed and accredited laboratories to do their testing. And so you have there's different testing. There's liquid chromatography, there's gas chromatography. Liquid chromatography is about the best they can do. It's indicative of what might be in a plant, but there's definitely no quality controls. And so I'm just sort of quoting from first hand from what Gabe from Colorado was saying, that until governments really get on board, taking half measures towards cannabis law reform are really, they really are just that. And telling people that, we can do it and we can legalise in the absence of any state government that's willingly introduced a meaningful cannabis regime is quite misleading to an extent. And I point that more at the state premiers, Labor and Liberal, who have been promising for quite a while. Any New South Wales people will remember we had the same thing with Bob Carr, and that led to nowhere. So the new push now is good, and I just think, Hemp Party really has a better angle on, better understanding of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. A question from the fella in the fourth row back.
Thanks for your thoughts tonight, guys. This is probably a question for David more than anyone. We've seen recently in Oregon in the States that a lot of people who have criminal records and have had prison sentences and things have actually had their records expunged and monetary, whatever the word is, they've been paid for the damages. And I know that, we all know that cannabis is eventually going to be legalised in Australia, but what do you think about the people for the last 80 years in Australia that have been demonised, have had their lives ruined, have been prisoned, have been, obviously damaged monetarily and socially? Does the Greens support any kind of making up for the past, for all of the wrongs that, as we would all agree in the room, that the law has been the problem, the law has been criminal?
Well, it's not a perfect analogy, but the obvious analogy that comes to mind is when we all decriminalised homosexual sex. And we made sure the age of consent was the same. And it took, 30 years after New South Wales moved to do that until we finally moved and passed a law, which only passed a few months ago in the New South Wales Parliament, where we expunged the criminal record of anybody who had been convicted under those previously grossly intolerant laws. And that was a good moment, I might say. We sometimes don't celebrate what happens. That was a good moment in politics. And we would absolutely support a similar regime being put in place when we legalise cannabis in New South Wales. We should be expunging the past criminal records because, it affects your travel, it affects your employment, it affects so much of your life, and it's time it ended.
My partner has a cultivation criminal record, so we've never been able to travel to America together, which is ridiculous. It was 40 years ago. Okay, it was 783-foot plants or something, but it was a really, and he was tripping when he got busted. So that. It was all an interesting story, which I'm sure he'll tell in a book one day. But I think expungement, and I do think that analogy of homosexuality, but it took us 30 years. And I hope that, and in Victoria we did it probably just before the New South Wales people, but it was a very good day when those records of people who are in their 60s and 70s were expunged. And I hope when we change the laws on cannabis, part of that law reform is the expungement and the recognition that those laws were discriminatory against people for their drug of choice.
Gabe, you want to comment?
I think one thing we need to keep in mind is when we hear the phrase regulate and tax, the alarm bells should be ringing, because that just means more government. It's more bureaucracy, adding more costs, more taxes that need to be raised just to cover the bureaucracy. We're already at a point where The old joke about the bureaucracies expanding to meet the needs of the expanding bureaucracy has ceased to be funny because it's actually true. If you're letting people grow cannabis plants at home, you do not need a regulation system. If I have the right to grow a plant at home, I should have the right to give that plant to a friend. My friend already has the right to give me some money, so I should already have a natural right to sell cannabis to people who wish to buy it. You can't argue with that. You can't say that there needs to be restrictions on the supply side and only licensed sellers can sell marijuana. It's ludicrous. If you can grow it at home, you can sell it to your friends.
The young man in the blue singlet.
I actually haven't got a question, but I've got a
Go
point
anyway.
to make, some information. In the UK, one of the big pushers, nudgers, seems to be the Treasury, who've said we have to legalise marijuana. Why? We don't want to spend money, we want to make it. There's certainly going to be taxes involved if it ever happens. There, it seems to me. But they are doing the pushing, the nudging.
We already have the tax in place. There's a 10% GST. So any cannabis that's sold through a commercial outlet will already be taxed. We don't need the tax part of the regulate and tax package either.
David, I don't agree with that. I think that that taxation is actually part of pushing law reform through, and it's an important part, and it's an important part to bring a lot of the major parties on board to understand that we can put this money back into our community. And you know, we tax alcohol, we tax a lot of other products, not just on their GST, but we tax them because we can put that money back into our community, and I think we should do that. And I also think that it's part of the sell for getting law reform through.
Yeah, well, I agree with Fiona. Ensuring that we can actually make it a good news story for Treasury is a core part of it. And it's not just the taxation, remember. The taxation is good, and I think a fair level of taxation, equitable taxation, is part of a civilised society. That's why we have public schools. That's why we have, better public transport, hopefully. I mean, that's part of a civilised society, a fair level of taxation. So we can sell it on that level. But we can also say, and we've seen push for law reform in this direction in some states in the southern part of the United States. In the southern part of the US, their prison population has been growing and growing and growing and growing exponentially, while the state's capacity to pay for those prisons and to pay for the courts and the police and the wardens and the jails to accommodate the prisons has been going backwards. And that has actually forced a bunch of conservative politicians in the United States to rethink that crazy cycle of criminal justice where they're jailing overwhelmingly African Americans, and that's actually seen the Treasury benches say to the politicians, stop with the craziness on law and order. Stop putting everybody in jail for a drug offence. Stop putting everybody in jail for these minor offences. And it's actually turned the political dynamic driven by the Treasury benches in those United States, those parts of the United States. Same with cannabis. We spend a huge amount of police resources, and we've seen it over the last few days. And there's a whole lot of people in jail in New South Wales, massively expanding jail population, that are there because we've made the wrong call on making cannabis illegal.
Thank you. We are running a little bit short of time. It's always such a pity, isn't it, when things hot up in terms of finding the truth. There's a person at the back, I think, who's got the call. And look, we really probably have room for... We'll make this the second last question comment, I think, but we really need to wrap up pretty soon. So if you've got another question, we have one at the front. The winning person is in the front row, but your question first, sir.
Given the dilemma that you spoke about, that no government has done it, federal government, and the control that the UN Cannabis Convention has, and given, David, your problem with a state policy with a federal policy and that's contradictory to that, and given that the federal government is the one that controls the scheduling of drugs and the regulation of drugs, isn't it really going to require something of a threat of like a secession of the Greens New South Wales from the federal Greens, and a secession of New South Wales from the Federation in regards to cannabis, that we take back our state right to regulate our medical industry and not give it to the federal government?
Now there's a plot.
The Greens are one happy party across the country. Let me be clear about that. Where we're staying together as a group. No, and it makes you stronger as a federated party, and that's why we're part of the Australian Greens. But we've already seen it in the US, states which have actually stared down the federal government and actually said, you know what, you can have all the federal laws you like about saying that this is illegal to do anything with cannabis, and you can rely upon your international treaties to try and back up your federal law, but we're going to do it anyhow. We've got our citizens behind it, and they've stared the federal government down federally. And if California moves with its 40 million citizens and its, leading role in terms of world culture, when California moves, well then I think you're going to see the insurrection from below, from the states, actually force a change on the federal government. And we need to do the same here. We need states with a little bit of gumption and a little bit of courage to say our citizens want us to do it. We're moving to legalise cannabis and stare the federal government down. And I think, as we've seen in the US, when you have the people behind you, you can actually do it, and we will do it. I think if we're going to wait, with all due respect to what Andrew says, if we're going to wait to change the international treaties, withdraw from the international treaties, change the way the federal government operates, and then finally allow the states to act, we're never going to get there. We just got to do it.
Victoria last month set up a medicinal cannabis legislation. Now that was actually still staring down federal. So the states are doing it, and the states can do it. And we are a federation here, so states have a high degree of autonomy and a good degree of autonomy and can choose in certain respects. And a lot of those, a lot of times when we're talking Victoria that they're fearful, it's because of the international treaties. It's not because of the TGA and the scheduling of drugs. States can actually come out of that if they're brave.
And there's no enforcement. Yeah. There's no enforcement mechanisms on those international treaties other than you get a nasty note from the headmaster. Send the notes. We're going to do it.
Andrew wants to comment on that.
Yeah, well, I suppose the UN drug treaties weren't really about people smoking cannabis or using heroin. It was all about the even distribution of pharmaceutical drugs. So that's what's held over countries who do try to do something. Jamaica, for instance, had a 2-year drug commission. Federally, they wanted to vote unanimously that we should decriminalise cannabis. So there you've got a country really, built on the cannabis thing, Rastafarian religion and everything, and they still couldn't. And they weren't actually threatened with harm from the UN drug conventions that they weren't going to be able to get opiates and so forth. They were threatened with international foreign aid that they get, and so there is these things that happen, and Jamaica would truly love to stop criminalising its Rastafarians for smoking cannabis, but they can't. I probably should just only have to reiterate on what's happening in the states in the US. Those governments did run no campaigns, and I'll just elaborate a little bit more on what happened in Canada. In 2002, there was a federal high court decision that said that found in favour of medical cannabis use. They have a Charter of Rights, and so the High Court ordered the government, gave them 1 year to initiate a medical cannabis regime. The government took 2 years. It wasn't satisfactory, and the people took charge, and they opened up dispensaries. People wanted to buy some. They couldn't just grow it. The government over there has since fought another 9 High Court challenges to progress on medical cannabis. I was there last year, and when I got there, there was the Rona Ambrose, the Canadian Minister for Health, was up there saying the government, again, is outraged at the High Court decision. They will fight that decision tooth and nail. A court cannot decide what a medicine is. Marijuana is not medicine, and things like that. They were quotes from her. So we still, again, in Canada, it's just like in the US. There's no clinical trials. There's no, these dispensaries cannot use the banking system. There is no quality control. There is no access for all that cannabis that is lawfully being supplied to patients to be tested. So we have to really watch out when our politicians talk about, well, let's just do this, let's just do this. I think as a federal party, the Federal Hemp Party really does call on, a federal inquiry into this. There's a lot of things to really look at and discuss, and have a look at the international implications. I think it's very, very important. I think anything in the meantime is really, almost playing to the people. I don't believe when premiers say that they've legalised in their states, merely because, the infrastructure isn't there. The lawful source of cannabis, what it really comes down to, there is a lawful source of cannabis in the world. It's, anyone can look it up. It's from a US government agency called NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And that cannabis is owned by Monsanto. And we really, once we get to that and we look at that, the implications of that, we can understand we're in the same situation as opium. If you wanted to grow opium for medical purposes, it's legal. You could do if you wanted. It's easy to buy it over the counter. But imagine the trouble you would get into if you wanted to grow that opium lawfully for medical and clinical research. You're going to have to find a lawful source. You can't just go down the road and buy a packet of poppy seeds. Those poppies that are being used for lawful cannabis or lawful opiate use, there's proprietary on those. There's companies. There's 2 foreign companies that grow half the world's opium in Australia. There's no Australian companies involved. We have no ownership of that. Now, to think in some way where a government can just say, well, besides that no other government's done it, yes, we're going to grow it and we're going to magically have a lawful source of cannabis as described under the UN drug treaties, I can't see that happening. The very best I could see is that a government, with a stroke of the pen, does take that step. But it really has to be a very big step, and really we have to look at all those implications. Australia is one of the few countries in the world that makes money from the UN drug treaties, in that these 2 foreign companies are growing over half the world's opium in Australia. So that's where we are on it.
We are running out of time. Time for one more question.
I just wanted to make one point. We have an immediate problem in that the saliva testing has become so aggressive. Here we are on one hand we're getting closer towards medical trials, and here we are being harassed on a regular basis. Now, I'm a registered nurse. I've worked in drug and alcohol field for 30 years, and I know that they have the ability to set the parameters for the THC to genuinely catch people who've just had a joint but not the day before. What can any of you do or suggest that we can do about that?
I think it's fair to say that no politician has done more on this question than David, and he's sure he's got an answer.
Well, I did give a talk on it yesterday. That's okay, you should have come. And absolutely, the way I see it, in New South Wales, we've got a deeply conservative police commissioner, a guy called Andrew Scipione. We've got a deeply conservative police minister, a guy called Troy Grant. And we've got a deeply conservative premier, a guy called Mike Baird. And this is a troika that have got together and realised they're losing the argument on legalising cannabis broadly, and they want a plan B. And their plan B is RDT. They do have a plan B. It's called roadside drug testing, and they want to set the parameters and the levels so low for testing for cannabis that they think they can wipe out cannabis use through making it unlawful to get behind the wheel of a car if you've been if you smoked a joint within 28 days or 32 days. And I presented some stats yesterday. We just got some fresh statistics yesterday, which kind of proves your point. That it's pretty clear that they've changed the threshold just in the last 2 years, greatly reduced the threshold that they're testing for. Because the data that we had, we just got it from the police. Normally we have to take them to court. This time we didn't. We're taking them to court for something else. But it showed that in 2012, when they were testing, and they were doing about 15,000 tests a year, they were catching 2% of people testing positive with the oral swipe. 2013, it was about 3%. And then 2014 to 2015, you see this huge spike. And they're now catching 16% of drivers with that first oral swab test, an 8-fold increase. And they've massively increased the number of people they're testing, up to 67,000. It's going to go up to 97,000. The only rational explanation for that is they've greatly reduced the thresholds that they're testing, the sensitivity of the tests, and they want to rope more and more people in, even though they know as sure as night follows day, that the people they're roping in are not impaired, they're not a danger to anyone, it's purely about their war on cannabis.
Absolutely, and it has to stop. And whether we fight it in the courts, and I think the courts have been doing some... Stephen's been doing some great work on this, and it does have to be fought. And, you know, I was thinking, looking at this today, when you look at how police deal with people driving on prescription drugs, they have an impairment test or a sobriety test or no test. But if they see that person obviously impaired, then they treat it as such and you can be charged for impairment. But you're not prohibited from driving. And this is what we need to change. In part of my inquiry, we're trying to look at the evidence of any effectiveness on drug testing. Has it reduced the number of people driving on drugs? Has it reduced any harm connected with it? And those questions haven't been asked. But as David says, they have just been getting heavier and heavier and heavier with absolutely no evidence that this help society in any way, and it has to stop.
I don't actually have anything further to add to that. I was going to, I pretty much agree 100% with Fiona, but David has been doing some excellent work in New South Wales on not only the saliva testing, but also getting rid of the drug dogs and that sort of thing, and I think we should commend the New South Wales Greens on some of those things. The only thing that the police should be testing for is people's impairment, their ability to control a motor vehicle. If you're not impaired, you should be right to drive no matter what the contents of your blood are. And, you know, with all the video cameras and things that they've got today, to get enough evidence that somebody was too impaired to drive should be very simple with just, all you'd need is a mobile phone. You could take that to court, say this person was not right to drive, the judge will look at it, say yes, that person was not right to drive. Why are we spending all this money on saliva testing? It's ridiculous.
Andrew, a brief response?
Yeah, look, saliva testing is an issue that the Hemp Party has been really battling for a very long time. In fact, before even the introduction, in fact, we were quoted in the New South Wales parliamentary briefing and we gave the warning, if this strategy is employed, you will alter your drug use trends for the worse. We took direct advice from, look, we have to understand we're the only country using these devices, and we looked at those international reports that came out, and governments were warned not to use these devices. They didn't check for impairment, and the devices weren't developed scientifically. When I talked about there's only one lawful source of medical cannabis for scientific research, well, this group of companies that developed these products didn't get access to cannabis, and in fact, they just didn't. They kind of made it up a bit. They talk about where we visited coffee shops in Amsterdam, so. We were actually given a heads up for a whistleblower from Health Department. So we really looked at the issue very, very closely. We couldn't work out how they would test impairment. We definitely couldn't work out what they were testing for, whether it was residual cannabis, cannabinoids in the mouth, or metabolites that are produced from the consumption of cannabis. What we did know that the products were unreliable, and we pushed that, and we were quoted when we. At the time, I remember we spoke to the Greens considerably, but it was the Labor Party that brought them in. And so obviously it was no use talking to Labor about the issue. There was no use talking to the Liberals about it. We did, and in fact, and this is the real frustrating part for a really small party like the Hemp Party. We did have, at that time, 2006-07, quite a good, relationship with the Greens, but it was New South Wales Greens here in New South Wales that voted for saliva testing as well, which really disappointed many, many people. In fact, the Hansard Reid that Lee Rhiannon did vote for it and said that the advice that they had at the time was that cannabis could only be detected by these devices within an hour of its use. We never found out where that advice came from, and it was very disappointing for us, yeah. So that's where we've been fighting on this for a very long time. And this touches on industrial hemp. I'm an industrial hemp grower, and basically the whole industry is being held back by the saliva testing police, influence on other government departments claiming that the introduction of hemp seed food would interfere with saliva testing. We're the only country not allowed to eat hemp seed food, and we're the only country doing saliva testing. We've looked at the issue in depth, and we find a money trail going back to the company that has the exclusive rights to supply all the Australian police forces with these devices. And when we see the increased number of people getting busted, it's not because of Look, they came in with a zero, and this was discussed in Parliament. They came in, they were introduced with a per se zero level. So they haven't tested, they're not testing more accurately or testing to lower threshold. They did come in with a zero detection rate. So we were most sceptical about that. A parliamentary inquiry in Tasmania did find that the hold-up in hemp seed production for human consumption is holding back the entire industry. So it's good that we're talking about medical cannabis, but you know, I try to bring people back to reality on the issue and again have to explain, look, we haven't even done hemp seed food. So, you know, we really are behind it on this. And in fact, I can tell you that the federal government's position on hemp seed food, they believe that Australia would be contravening the UN drug conventions if we were to allow hemp seed food consumption. So, you know, to make the leap from there, to leapfrog that and say that we're going to go forward with medical, I think, you know, is a big call, and people should really read about what is going on. There's lots of stuff on the web. You can read lots of stuff on the web, especially about cannabis. But a majority of it, you know, probably goes too far. But, you know, it's really hard to intricately go into what's holding medical cannabis and industrial cannabis back until you go to those parliamentary inquiries, read the final reports and get your information from there. But thank you.
Glenn, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, most, if not all of the issues that have been raised tonight can be solved through the political process by hemp. And I just want to reinforce a point that I touched on earlier. The New South Wales election is about 3 years away. I would urge hemp, Sex Party and the Liberal Democrats, and I know all of these groups have supporters here tonight, I would urge you to register in New South Wales because all of you can be elected. We saw the Animal Justice Party elected on less than 2%, and I know you guys can pull that. And I know your position is very similar to that of the Greens on legalisation of cannabis, and it would be great to see more diversity in the Parliament. So anything I can do to help, you've all got my number.
Thank you, Glenn. And look, thank you to all of our panellists. We really do have to get out of this room. I don't know when, 7:30 apparently. I think we're meant to be having a comedy tonight. Hooray, change of pace again for MardiGrass. They need a bit of time to set up. So look, thank you once and for all. Oh, David's very keen to... Oh, yes, sorry. Before we go, I did ask everybody before, each of the panellists, to think about one little thing, little-ish thing anyway, that might change the world a little bit without having to change everything. So I'm just going to ask people to go down from Andrew, or in fact from Gabe, we'll start with Gabe, just to say what they've thought might be the best little thing to do in terms of law reform.
Well, my little thing that I thought about when you asked me to was to do with the saliva testing, and just change it from testing people's saliva and spending fortune on swabs and on machines and things. You know, give the police a camera, let them do field sobriety tests. If they get the evidence, they take it to court, they show it to a magistrate. Simple. And people who aren't impaired don't get caught up in the legal system.
Thank you. Fiona?
I think I was reflecting on like one small thing that maybe I can help do. And in Victoria, where we have introduced medicinal cannabis legislation, however, the medical cannabis that will be available is restricted to young children with severe epilepsy, and that won't even be available to them but legally until 2017. So my task when I get back to Parliament next week is to call on the government to create an instant amnesty for those parents who are keeping their children alive with this medicine until they can be provided with a legal source.
Another good answer, David.
Yeah. Well, I'm dead set keen to get rid of drug dogs and sort out roadside drug testing, but probably to throw something in the debate we haven't spoken about. One thing we could do is when it comes to cannabis law reform, I think it's maybe time we got away from being trapped about talking about harm minimisation. Because whenever we're talking about harm minimisation, it's often what you hear from drug law reform advocates, you've almost bought the opposition's argument, because your first word of that is harm. And we know when it comes to cannabis that you can't kill yourself by ODing on cannabis, that overwhelmingly, 1/3 of the population's tried cannabis, and palpably they have not suffered harm. Yeah. It's not just about harm minimisation. When it comes to cannabis law reform, I think we also need to get away from just talking about harm minimisation. Sure, regulating it would actually get rid of the criminal element. We know what levels are in the cannabis that people are using. But you know what? It would also let people be a bit more relaxed. It means you wouldn't feel surrounded by police. It means you wouldn't, if you go to Coogee in Sydney, you wouldn't see necessarily a whole bunch of totally drunken yobs punching each other up. You'd see the kind of chilled out scenes we've seen here in Nimbin. There'd be a whole lot of good stuff with it as well.
Glenn.
When I was about 11 years old, I was pressured by my parents and a school teacher to get involved in the school council, which I didn't want to do. And my school teacher said to me something I've never ever forgotten, and that is, those that show up rule the world. And I just want to reinforce what I touched on a few minutes ago. All of you show up, and that could be in the form of writing letters to the local paper, getting involved in your local council, putting in submissions to committees at state, federal, local government level, and you guys forming political parties in New South Wales.
I think we got the message there. We're going to have to get registered in New South Wales. So yeah, tell your friends, especially check us out on Facebook. And when we do make the call for people to fill out download the form and fill it out. In New South Wales, you actually have to fill out a form and send it in to us. So bear that in mind. I think, as a hemp party, we sort of have prioritised what we're looking at in terms of medical cannabis, industrial cannabis, hemp and hemp seed food, and recreational cannabis. I think recreational cannabis is doing gangbusters. It's going great. It's doing $5 billion a year. If the government can do something, we would direct them to have a look at medical cannabis. Look, if they want to do their clinical trials and they want to do all that, that's fine. But really, what we'd really sit down and talk to them about is some interim measures that would really address the concerns and address the issues faced by tens of thousands of Australians who are currently using cannabis for medical purposes. And until we get interim measures, I think waiting around for clinical trials, which are just starting maybe next year for some children, is far too long. And I think it probably just highlights what I've been trying to say, that there is international roadblocks and obstacles which make it very, very difficult. Thanks.
Thank you very much to each and every one of our esteemed, I think we can say that, panellists. Gabe, Buckley, oh yes, and also the equally esteemed me. Gabe Buckley, Liberal Democrats, Fiona Patten, Sex Party, David Shoebridge, New South Wales Greens, Glenn Druery, Strategist at Large, Andrew Kavasilas, Hemp Party. Thank you one and all for the excellent contribution. Thank you one and all for the incisive and relevant questions. Thank you for the applause. Thanks for being at MardiGrass. Thanks for doing something beyond being at MardiGrass. The answer is to be active. Coming here is a great thing. Do something else. Do something. Whatever it is, work it out for yourselves, but be active. I encourage you all to do something. Take a positive step. Bring a friend with you on that positive step. And next year when we come to MardiGrass, we will have made a change. I'm sure of it. Thank you.